We thank Mr. Georgios Stasis, CEO of PPC, for his very insightful remarks regarding the energy sector in the coming years and what PPC also is planning to do. We have a very interesting fire chat conversation right now, following on the same topic actually. So it's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Joseph Marcotte, Director of Energy Security and Climate Change Program for the Center of Strategic International Studies. He will chat with Elena Giannakopoulou, Group Chief Strategy Officer of the Public Power Corporation. Please, both of you. Could you take in the middle, maybe? Sure.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Josh, for being here today.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me.
Hope you're enjoying it. So we will, for the next few minutes, we will talk about a study that the CSIS committed on the energy security in Europe,
Right.
With the lens of someone on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yes, of course.
So as Mr. Stasi said, the recent energy crisis, it has been just a difficult period. It has been really a moment in history.
Yeah.
It changed our perspective here in Europe. Systems were challenged, but electrons kept flowing, gas kept flowing, lights stayed on. What are maybe the most important messages emerging from your study and your analysis? And
Right.
do you see the definition of energy security in Europe really changing? We think we do, but
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Maybe by way of introduction, in case you don't know, I work at a research organization in Washington, D.C., Center for Strategic and International Studies. We're the world's preeminent national security and foreign policy think tank. And our job is to help the U.S. government think through the big leadership challenges that it faces. And for a long time, we've had an energy security program, which I would say focused on the incumbent definition of energy security, right? Smooth access to global oil markets and other natural resources. When we undertook this study, which we're very grateful for the support of PPC for, by the way, it was our goal to work with my team, who are energy experts, and our European program, who are focused on NATO relations, EU security, and a positive relationship between the US and the European Union more generally, to answer that exact question, right? So you go to these energy conferences and like all these eminent guys go, this really showed that the energy security conversation is back on the map, you know? And in the US, there was a lot of triumphant feelings about the role that particularly US LNG had played in helping maintain physical energy security in Europe in the 2021, 2022, 2023. We wanted to really assess, you know, that piece of the story, and I think argue and tell the whole story for our colleagues in the United States, that it wasn't just US LNG, which did play a critical role, but also the deployment of renewables, the deployment of demand response and efficiency measures, and that as energy security comes back on the map, it's coming back in a very different way. And I think we found that is actually true, that the relative contributions of these different things are almost kind of equal when you look across Europe, though of course that varies country by country, and that as we think about this next stage of managing an energy transition, managing a more geopolitically fraught world, there are real lessons that come from the experience of Europe for the last 2 years for how we can build a more resilient energy system going forward.
That's good. In the past, when we were talking about security of supply in Europe, the most of the times we were thinking, do we have enough megawatts, enough gigawatts on the ground of thermal capacity to
Right.
meet like peak demand during winter? That was our definition 3 years ago. But talking about resilience, maybe how things are evolving, we see it in our portfolio at PPC, right?
Yeah.
Resilience is very important, and there are quite a few ways to source this resilience. Complementarity of sources is one of them. For example, we have PV plants here in Greece that they complement very well with our wind generation in Romania. And of course, there are all these different technologies that play a role, that played a role during the crisis, and they will continue, like gas delivering value, not volume though, right?
Yeah, it's puzzling. You know, I was listening to Mr. Milonas, and he was talking about the stochasticity, right? The uncertainty of the system. And when we think about the security challenge, we have to think about those same things. And we look to, like, what are the system attributes that actually help us build resilience or build security as there's a lot of uncertainty in what the energy system is going to look like, or in the day-to-day variation of generation. And it's strong markets. I mean, this is what the EU actually provides, right? So it's not, you know, if you need to balance your solar farms with your wind, and those are geographically disparate, you need a strong market structure that allows for that balancing to happen and for it to be affordable. Some of it's going to be new technologies, right? We were talking about batteries last night at dinner, which are playing an enormous resilience role in California and Texas and other states. But what does the supply chain for those batteries look like? Our political leadership in the United States is more and more worried about where we're sourcing these goods, both for cybersecurity reasons as well as for economic security reasons. If we have 1,000 gigawatts of battery potentially being built in the United States over the next 10 years, it's just not acceptable to our political leadership to not have that come from a pretty diverse supply chain. Right now, it's almost entirely dominated by China. And so as we look at making these transitions, we need to think about the attributes. And I think, you know, pretty strongly, the lessons of the last 2 years tell us strong markets, maybe you need to change the rules of them a little bit, are key. And then resilient supply chains are sort of the next step in building this new definition of energy security.
Interesting. What we saw in our markets during the crisis is that actually we have the right mechanism here in Europe. So markets are responding to the messages they get.
Prices work.
Prices work, right? Thankfully they do. But what we need, and we have a lot of regulation around Europe, we are really good at establishing regulation. The challenge we see also as someone that is in the market is as an integrated utility, so we are across the different stages of the market, is coordination.
Right.
And coordination goes both on the physical assets, what was mentioned earlier on about having the infrastructure, green and cheap electricity flowing around Europe, but also coordination in terms of investments. Because otherwise you're risking of over-investing and overbuilding in your effort to have enough backup capacity. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is, if we coordinate in Europe, as we tried to do, to a degree successfully during the crisis, we have a lot of power because economies of scale, right? Negotiation power. There is a critical mass that you need if you coordinate to leverage what is emerging from the size of Europe. And the other thing, of course, you need market stability. So I think that the market mechanisms work. They delivered, as I said. When gas prices went up, they went up. When gas prices went down, the prices came down. But we need, and I will put my developer and investor hat at PPC, we need a market that is stable, not predictable, that is stable and ensures us to deliver both what is needed for clean energy transition, but also what is needed for security of supply.
And when you look at those mechanisms coordination, what are the most important ones that you think we need to be developing, right? So some of it is just going to happen at conferences like this. Some of it happens at the government or the EU level. Some of it happens at the transatlantic level.
All of them. All of them. I mean, we have a new commission in the forming.
Right.
You have elections in the US.
Right.
So I think all of them in the next few months are critical, especially because the energy transition across Europe is happening very, very fast. And we don't want, as you pointed out very correctly, to switch from over-dependency on fossil fuels from a certain source to over-dependency in terms of where we source our equipment and our critical raw materials.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is an area where I think transatlantic cooperation is going to be really important, right? At the moment, what we see is countries around the world, and the U.S. is kind of principal in this, really wanting to say, okay, we want this supply chain here, right? We're scared of these tightly controlled supply chains. We want to compete with China. You know, the motivation varies depending on where you are. We want to be part of this clean energy transition. We want to be, capture value as part of it by manufacturing. Of course, it's ridiculous. We don't need to have this autarkic system where every country has, enough battery manufacturing capacity to meet their own needs. So absolutely, market coordination and government coordination becomes important. The key, I think, is figuring out where do you allow for enough diversity that you get innovation and you get enough competition that prices go down, versus how do you avoid sort of a top-down situation where coordination stops that kind of innovation. And there, I think, when I look at the transatlantic, as just to pick one example, we really do need to be smart if we're going to think about the role that gas is playing as an energy security backstop for the next few decades, but transitioning to hydrogen as the next tool for sort of an energy security backstop. We need to be thoughtful about what is clean hydrogen in the United States, what is clean hydrogen in Europe, what is clean hydrogen in Japan, in Africa, in the Middle East, because one of the lessons from the last few years is a relatively globalized and robust LNG market allowed for physical energy security. Yes, at cost, but it allowed for physical energy security because cargoes could be diverted, traders were able to meet the needs of importers, and we need to build a system that is going to have similar resilience going forward. You can then take that same lesson and project it fractally into, I'm sure, the politics of the Eastern Med or of Southeast Europe as you're thinking about the energy system, as you're thinking about the transmission system that's going to help meet needs. But we need to make sure that we're keeping the same characteristics.
That's fair. So when we are looking at it overall, yes, the definition of security of supply is changing as the system is evolving with, let's say, coordination, diversification, and flexibility being at the core of it.
Yeah. I sort of bucket in 3 ways, right? That we're changing into, and policymakers now when they say energy security, they mean lots of different things. They might mean physical security, right? An energy that is available when it is needed. They might mean economic security, which means both that prices are acceptable and sustainable. I think one of the challenges of the last 2 years is the amount of spending that had to happen was completely unsustainable. And so we need to be more resilient. We need to build a system that's going to be more resilient to price spikes. But then also, is sort of, maybe you would say politically resilient, right? You don't want to have an energy system where there isn't value being captured by
I
Europe.
would say dynamic regulation, to
Sure.
put it a bit more. A system where regulation is dynamic and is following
And then-
evolution.
And then lastly, we need a system that is geopolitically resilient, right? Nobody really knows where we are going. But the intuitions that most of us have built over the last 20 or 30 years of increasing globalization and increasing liberalization are under severe question now. And so making sure that we build a system where like-minded countries, connecting countries, and antagonists can all play a part in maintaining a secure global energy system, as well as responding to climate change, is critically important. And when you say energy security, you might be referring to any one of those at this time, because there's so much change happening at once.
So let's say that security of supply is now developing in 2 axes. You can look at the system and all these things that we talked about. There are diversity in terms of technologies, geographies, connectivity, all these things. And then there is the macro, which has to do with the new definition that includes the climate change, the geopolitical tensions, the cybersecurity, as of course digitalization is progressing.
Yeah, right. What do we do?
Am I missing anything?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're missing one, but there's one that I think is really important, and as we're going about this study, we're learning more and more about, and that is just physical security of infrastructure, right? So if you kind of you have in your mind where generally we're going to a more electrified system, bigger, larger markets provide a lot of resilience. That's a lesson from the last 2 years. It's no surprise for anybody, especially in the power industry. But if we're talking about building undersea power lines, which Europe is going to rely on, that run under the Mediterranean, or run from the UK to Norway, the politics of that actually get a little bit interesting.
Complicated.
They're complicated, right, because the lack of the ability to store a lot of electricity means you need to develop different intuitions from what we have from oil and gas, and that is pretty critical and vulnerable infrastructure, right? Relatively easy with a submarine or a nefarious actor to cut those lines. And then there's it introduces a lot of dependence on both sides, right? Whereas previously you had exporters and importers by and large. Now you've got a system that has to constantly be in balance. And so companies are going to have to figure out, how do we build a lot of trust in this larger system, which will deliver efficiency benefits, it'll deliver carbon benefits, it will reduce costs, it will provide resilience. But I think we need to build a lot of trust in that system. That's been one of the things, as we had a conference in Washington earlier this year, as we've been talking to policymakers on both sides of the Atlantic, when they really think about making long-term strategic decisions about energy, the physical security of the system. Now I think you can also kind of bin cybersecurity in there too, are top of mind.
Okay. Good. I think we gave enough insights from your analysis on the energy security to the audience, and thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for
Sharing
having
your
me,
thoughts.
and it's been such a delight to be here in Thessaloniki and at this conference today.
Thank you.